However, there are some things that you need to take into account when you want to develop your own in-house solution as well. So the first and very important thing is the data. So there are cases where this can be your power or it can be a very significant disadvantage. Let's say that you want to develop a product in computer vision or natural language processing. You're going to need gigabytes or terabytes of data to do that. And there are some open data sets out there, but there's no way you can compete with the big companies. However, in some other cases, maybe the big companies don't really possess any kind of data which might be useful for you. Maybe you work in a very special domain and the kind of data which you possess can be used to create a product which the big companies can come up with. So let's say, for example, that you want to create a translator for restaurant menus between different languages. In this case, this is a very special scenario. So it's not something that's probably covered from mainstream machine translation services. So in this particular case, maybe you'd be better off by using a model that has been open sourced by Google. It is already pre-trained on some languages, and then use the data you have collected to retrain this model and make it even better. And then some other considerations about the in-house bit is that you need to have a very detailed breakdown of the costs, right? Whereas for commoditized services, it can be easier since you know the cost per call or for subscribing to a service. For in-house, it's a bit more complicated because you're gonna have to hire people, but also you're going to have to maintain the servers, etc. What is most likely going to happen is that you might have to spend lots of money in the beginning to develop a solution. Some solutions could be, let's say, 30, 50, or 100,000 dollars, euros, or pounds. However, once you do this, then the costs are going to be significantly less, since you can work, for example, through contractors, and once they deliver a piece of work, then you just need some maintenance and nothing else really. Finally, another important point to make is that you need to take into account the flexibility that you need and whether domain knowledge is important for your particular problem. What I mean by that, when you develop an in-house solution, you have more flexibility. Let's say you have a recommender system and you have lots of domain knowledge about your problem. So there's this common issue in recommender systems called the cold start problem, which means it's difficult to make recommendations to users without any data. However, if you have lots of domain knowledge about your particular area, then you could come up with heuristics and rules to provide users with some recommendations as soon as they sign up before having any data about them. And that's very powerful. And that's not something that a big company can do for you. You'd have to do it for yourself. And since you might actually do that anyway, since you're developing this code, you might as well start developing your in-house capabilities. However, if you're a big retailer and have a big and organized database and lots of data, then maybe you're better off by using the solution that a big company provides, which is also accompanied by huge servers to run analytics and find patterns within your users and their data. So again, the right answer as to whether to go for in-house or commoditized service lies within your particular case. You have to take all these considerations into account. So the thing is that in every case, something is lost and something is gained. So commoditized services are the ultimate black boxes. They can work very well. They have lots of resources backing them up, provided by big and trusted companies such as Microsoft, Google, IBM, Amazon, etc. But they're quite specialized. And also they will probably ignore your particular domain. In some cases where you actually have to understand your domain, you need some bespoke work for that on your data, irrespective of whether you go for a commoditized service or not. So then again, coming back to the example of a retailer, sooner or later, you're probably going to need a report on your users, the different clusters of users, their spending patterns, etc. You might also have to do some restructuring in the database to optimize it for analytics. And this is actually true for commoditized services as well, right? Before you feed the data to a service, you'd have to take care about some of those things, find maybe the most important variables, restructure the database a bit. So even when you're going for commoditized services, some pieces of in-house work still have to be done. So what to do? What's the solution to this problem? So I'd say there are 4 steps you can take, right? So the first thing you need to take care of is you need to make sure that your case, your particular case, is covered by the service you're investigating. Discovered by Microsoft or IBM Watson or Google Cloud or whatever. Because if it's not covered, obviously, then, there's really no dilemma there. And then, I still think in the majority of cases, it's a good idea to try and roll something out, an MVP or a proof of concept based on a commoditized service, just because it can help you do that faster, right? It's good to have a data scientist there, maybe as a consultant, not hired full-time, to help you out a bit with this. to help you figure out maybe some traps around the data, some things you need to take care of. But in any case, just go ahead and use this service initially just to get something rolling. It would also be a good idea to have some kind of performance measure for this service. Think what would your minimum threshold be to keep you happy with the usage of this service. So roll this MVP out, deal with all the other issues outside of technology that surround your business, for example, user feedback, investor feedback, etc. Hopefully, whilst you're rolling out this service, you're also consulting with an actual data scientist who can, as I mentioned, advise you on best practices for data collection, etc. And after, let's say, a couple of months of testing, you see where you stand. You see where you stand, and you can see whether you're happy with the service and you want to keep it for now. You should go do something in-house. The reality is that sooner or later, once a startup gets enough resources, it's probably better doing something in-house because, I mean, you just can't beat the flexibility that this brings. And as I explained earlier, there are some cases where commoditized services may not be suitable because either a particular case is not covered or you already need to do lots of work even before you use the commoditized service. Maybe wrangle the data, restructure the database, understand the data better, where if you're actually going to start doing this work, maybe you can start developing a solution anyway. And finally, something else you need to be aware of is that everyone wants to sell. And that's true both for big corporations, that's true both for individuals, freelancers, smaller consultancies, etc. So all the big corporations, they try to convince you that their solutions are amazing. Since you're in a very special domain, you should try to develop your own IP. So the in-house, whereas quite often what you need from them is not to spend, let's say, 6 months of building something in-house from scratch. What you need is some consultation, right? Some advice to understand what are the best steps moving forward. And as always in the world of startups, it's good to be agile. It's good to adapt to many different kinds of scenarios, but it's also very good to plan, right? So I'm a firm believer in setting up the right data strategy from day zero that can predict anything that could go, anything that could go wrong. That's why I believe that it's a very good idea to maybe ask 2-3 opinions from different people before you proceed. And it's definitely a good idea before you even start out to consult with a data scientist about their opinion as to how you should proceed. But keep an open mind because everyone wants to sell in this business, and always be aware of the different options you have in terms of costs and time. So suggestion I give to my clients quite often, since I know that startups try to be cost efficient, is to try and go for open source solutions. So this is like a good way to break this dilemma. Obviously, open source has many proponents. Not everyone likes open source, but for many things in machine learning right now, open source is amazing. And I'm not just talking about standard machine learning functionalities. I'm also talking about things such as sentiment analysis, some computer vision, and things such as object recognition. There are deep neural networks that have been open sourced by Google. There are libraries which are completely free to use even for commercial products. So using data scientists to develop something in-house using open source can be a cost-efficient way to basically solve this dilemma. So this was Stelios from the TESSERACT Academy. I hope you enjoyed this video where we discussed about the common dilemma that startups face, whether to go for a commoditized service in machine learning or whether to build this capability in-house. Make sure to visit our webpage and also join our YouTube channel. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon again in another one of our videos.